Right, we're going to cross those stories and more. And to do that, I'm joined by media writer for The Australian, Sophie Elsworth, and the Deputy Executive Director of the Institute of Public Affairs, Daniel Wild. Well, we just heard from Olivia there about the collapse of Rex. It's the second airline to fall into administration in 4 months. Calls today for the government to step in and prop up Rex. The Prime Minister, of course, today not ruling out taxpayer support. I have to say, I'll upset my friends in the country here, but I am not a fan of governments throwing taxpayer money at any sort of private business, even if it's an airline we need in a country area. But if the government had done what it was told to do, open up competition, to act on recommendations that are on the minister's desk, to give Rex access to Sydney Airport landing rights, I tell you what, Daniel, all of this might actually have been averted.
Well, that's right, Peter. I'm not holding my breath for any pro-competitive policies coming out of this government when it comes to the aviation sector. Of course, Qantas works hand in glove with the government, and there was a quid pro quo whereby the government blocked access of Qatar Airways into Australia to restrict that competition to further support the profits of Qantas in exchange for Qantas supporting the divisive voice to Parliament. It was basically taxpayer funds go to Qantas and that gets back out recycled to campaign in favour of the voice to Parliament, which 60% of Australians rejected. So there's that issue. So look, the issue, Peter, is that we need a government that's actually focused on better outcomes for consumers rather than protecting the duopoly in the aviation sector. And that comes down to structural reform of the sector. I agree with your assessment. We can't just be shoveling tens of millions of dollars out to support companies that might not be able to make it commercially, but clearly we need to get much more serious about making sure that Rex and other airlines can get on those more profitable routes.
And we have to make it so that the regional routes are profitable for them, because we've got to have planes in the region, and no doubt about that, but I don't like the idea of taxpayers' money being thrown at private businesses, as I've said. Home buyers, so we know now in the current climate they can't borrow as much money as they could 2 years ago, and as a result, there's been a real slump in Melbourne house prices. Well, I think house prices across the board, but Melbourne's really suffered. In fact, Perth's about to eclipse Melbourne from next month for the first time since February 2015. And this will rank Melbourne below Sydney, Brisbane, Canberra, Adelaide and Perth. Now, no secret in Victoria, of course, Labor's hitting the property sector with more and more taxes. But my worry is Melbourne pretty soon is going to be Australia's biggest capital city, but it'll have the cheapest homes, which is a worrying sign to me. We could end up, like streets of San Francisco or those other rundown cities in California if we're not careful.
Well, Peter, there will be obviously some members of the public who'll be thrilled to think that that could happen, because buying a home has been so difficult for people trying to break into the market. But for those with homes, this is shocking news. I do think people borrowed far too much money, particularly in the last decade or so. And then I think prices were far too high. And this has had to settle down. But obviously with all these interest rate rises and potentially more on the way, we could even have one next week, although many experts are saying that we won't. There's more pain to be felt. So this is very uncomfortable for people who already own property. But as they say, Peter, it's always a good time to buy and sell in the same market. So you could see people trying to optimise these lower house prices in cities such as Melbourne.
All right, let's go to Adelaide, where you are right now, Daniel Wild. Opposition energy spokesman Ted O'Brien set to make a big speech there, outlining the coalition's position on nuclear security with a little bit more detail on the development of uranium enrichment industry. This speech comes as an engineer and a pro-nuclear advocate was forced out of delivering a speech at a recent conference to the Engineers Australia Association because of an objection from Tealbacker Simon Holmes at court. Now, finally, the bloke will get to give his remarks, but you are a part of tonight's event. The IPA is hosting the event. What can we expect to hear from Ted O'Brien?
Well, thanks, Peter. That's right. Look, tonight Ted O'Brien will be outlining a very ambitious reform agenda for the coalition. not just in relation to the energy supply from potential nuclear power stations that we know about, but an entire new industry in Australia around uranium and the value-add process that industry could have for our nation's future. And there's been some reports in the media about that already. And I think it goes to the point, Peter, that what we're seeing is the opposition providing a debate for the community. They're willing to undertake, what is often considered to be tough issues, and to make sure there's better information out there for people to make a choice. Because clearly the current approach of this government is not working. Prices are going up, reliability is going down, the jobs are going out, but they're doubling down on a failed strategy with the net zero policy of these large-scale solar and wind projects in country areas that are dividing the communities and are expensive and not getting the job done in terms of energy reliability. So I think what the coalition's offering is very exciting for the future, and clearly Australians are very hungry to have a proper debate about this critical matter.
Well, let's go to the US. More controversy there in the US presidential campaign. Donald Trump openly questioning whether Kamala Harris became a black person. That's his quote, to get ahead in politics, during an appearance at an event for black journalists. Now, she did not appear at this event for the journalists, nor has she done an interview at all with journalists since she became the nominee, or the de facto nominee. But President Trump was there. US correspondent Annalise Nielsen has more.
From the moment he stepped onto the stage at the National Association of Black Journalists conference, it was clear there wasn't going to be a warm welcome for Donald Trump.
Sir, do you believe that Vice President Kamala Harris is only on the ticket because she is a black woman?
I've known her a long time indirectly. She was always of Indian heritage, and she was only promoting Indian heritage. I didn't know she was black until a number of years ago when she happened to turn black, and now she wants to be known as black. I respect either one, but she obviously doesn't, because she was Indian all the way, and then all of a sudden she made a turn and she became a black person.
One of the weaknesses in Joe Biden's re-election campaign was the deterioration of support for the president among black voters, who typically lean more Democrat. Those same voters have been leaning towards Donald Trump, and polling shows that's largely because of his economic policies. However, messy appearances like this one will undoubtedly be a setback for Trump's campaign.
Is repulsive, it's insulting, and, no one has any right to tell someone who they are, how they identify. That is no one's right.
Meanwhile, Kamala Harris skipped out on attending the National Association of Black Journalists conference entirely, but following backlash has agreed to organise a Zoom call in September. Harris has not taken part in a single interview with a journalist since it was announced Joe Biden was stepping down as the Democratic candidate for president.
Okay, Daniel, this is a sensitive issue, but just like the whole identity debate here in Australia, it's pretty hard to criticise being asked about your identity when it's been your calling card for decades, when it's been how you have defined yourself politically. That's not an easy line to tread.
I agree, Peter. And as Annalise outlined in that snippet there, Trump was doing very well with African-American and minority voters. So clearly the Democrats are concerned about this. And you just look at, well, why was he doing well? Because he was talking about issues that they care about and that mainstream Americans care about. I watched the entire interview that Trump did, and he basically said, look, we've got this mass unlawful migration that's taking jobs and causing crime. We've had the offshoring of manufacturing and industrial jobs, and there's a huge challenge presented to families with the drug epidemic. Now, all of these things are challenges for all Americans, but especially those in minority and a lot of African-American communities. So that's why he's done so well with those people, because he speaks about the issues they're concerned about and he doesn't talk down to them. I think that a lot of people in sort of those minority communities are getting pretty fed up of being put into a box and told, just because you've got this background, you have to vote Democrat. I don't think that's the case whatsoever. And Trump really presents, I think, a challenge to that established thinking.
Sophie, Joe Biden's often referred to the ethnicity of his vice president. Clearly that's treacherous for Donald Trump. She has a shocking record on borders. Surely that's where she's the most vulnerable.
Well, you would think so, Peter. We know that she has got a bad record there, and I do find it very interesting that she has not done media interviews since she's announced that she'll be taking over from Joe Biden. I find that extremely curious. Like, why isn't she fronting the media? Sometimes she's not a good media performer, and I think she could run into problems down the track when she does do interviews, and perhaps she is nervous of fronting the media for what she might say and if there are slip-ups. So I think a lot of the media contingency and the public will be anxiously waiting for her to front the media.
I think right now, though, most of them are running a protection racket like they did for Joe Biden for many years, but we'll see if that changes. Sophie, thanks for your time. Dan, I hope everything goes well tonight with that big nuclear speech in Adelaide.